She bought lunch for black stranger with her last dollar, not knowing he was the new CEO she's talking. The rain had finally eased to a soft drizzle, casting silvery reflections of streetlights and passing cars across the slick sidewalk. Riley Morgan tugged her worn coat tighter around her slender frame, her damp blonde hair clinging to her cheeks. In one hand, she clutched a resume, folded and a bit smudged at the edges where the ink had bled from the damp, but she held onto it like a lifeline. Another interview. Another shot. Maybe. Her stomach growled, reminding her she had skipped breakfast again. She peeked into her wallet while waiting at the crosswalk, 4.16. Enough for a cheap coffee or a bus fare, but certainly not both. The light changed, and she stepped off the curb, boots splashing through a shallow puddle. Outside the corner deli, she spotted a man middle-aged, dressed in a wrinkled shirt and faded jeans slip on the wet pavement. A burst brown paper bag lay next to him, its contents of a half-soaked sandwich and a crumpled drink strewn across the ground. He winced, trying to rise while holding his side, but no one paused to help him. People just kept walking. Riley didn't even think. She hurried over, bending down to steady him. "You all right?" she asked gently. He looked up, surprised, rain plastering his hair to his head and soaking his sleeves. "I think I'll live," he said with a strained chuckle. "Just bruised my pride, mostly." She offered her hand, helping him to his feet. As he glanced down at his ruined lunch, a small, embarrassed smile crossed his face. "Well, there goes my lunch." Without a word, Riley stepped into the deli. A few minutes later, she reappeared with a turkey sandwich neatly wrapped in wax paper, along with a bottle of water. She handed them to him without hesitation. He blinked. "Miss, I can't take that." "You don't have to," she replied, a tired but sincere smile on her face. "Looks like you need it more than me." He accepted the food, visibly stunned. "Why?" he asked, honest confusion in his voice. "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Riley's smile softened, her voice quiet but steady. "Because I've been the one on the ground. I know how it feels." The man nodded slowly, clearly moved. "Thank you," he said, earnest. She nodded once in reply, turned, and walked away, shoving her hands back into her coat pockets. "Your name?" he called after her. She paused, only glancing over her shoulder. "Riley." "Thank you, Riley," he repeated, but she was already merging into the passing crowd. If she'd looked back, she might have noticed the thoughtful, almost regretful expression on his face as he watched her leave. Riley rounded the next corner, stepping under a narrow awning, and pulled out her wallet again. Empty, except for 4 coins rattling at the bottom. Her stomach twisted with hunger, sharper now that adrenaline had faded. She shook her head, letting out a slow breath, and looked up at the glass skyscraper before her, Vailcorp. Her destination. The tower loomed in front of her, sleek and modern, almost intimidating in its perfection. Her own reflection stared back at her through the polished doors, wet hair, hollow eyes, a paper-thin folder clutched like a shield. One more breath. Then she stepped inside. The lobby was bright and warm, with marble floors shining under recessed lights. A faint smell of coffee and citrusy cleaners hovered in the air. People in tailored suits moved briskly past her, exuding confidence she could barely imagine. She approached the front desk. "Hi," she managed, voice steady despite the flutter in her chest. "I'm here for a 1 o'clock interview. Riley Morgan." The receptionist nodded after checking the list. Yes, Ms. Morgan. You're expected. Elevator to the 22nd floor. Thank you, Riley murmured, moving toward the bank of elevators. She caught a glimpse of her reflection again in the brushed metal doors, tired, underdressed, unpolished, but she straightened her shoulders anyway. The elevator chimed softly at the 22nd floor, opening onto plush carpets and high-end decor. A glass-walled waiting room held a handful of other candidates, polished, confident, scrolling on their phones without a care. Riley smoothed back her damp hair, tucking it behind her ears, and hugged her resume to her chest like it might shield her from the world. Across the corridor, behind tinted glass, a man stood observing with a tablet in hand. Ethan Vale. His tailored suit was crisp, a far cry from the faded clothes he'd worn earlier, but his eyes were the same, sharp, perceptive, and quietly watchful. When he spotted Riley, a strange flicker crossed his features. It was the same woman who had handed him her last sandwich without a second thought, even though she had clearly been struggling herself. He hadn't expected to see her again, let alone here. For a moment, he didn't move. Then he turned away, deciding to listen, watch who she was, unguarded. Riley took a seat among the other applicants, nervously toying with the corner of her resume, damp and soft from being clutched too hard. Around her, the others seemed relaxed, laughing, confident. She felt painfully out of place, like a smudge on a gleaming pane of glass. Riley Morgan. A voice snapped her back to attention. She stood, following a woman in a dark green suit into a medium-sized conference room. 3 people waited there, a representative from HR, a department manager, and someone from legal. All wore pleasant, professional expressions. The interview began smoothly enough. Questions about her skills, her adaptability, her certifications. Riley answered carefully, truthfully, gaining a fragile confidence that felt like a balloon trying to rise. Then came the question she feared. One of the interviewers leaned forward, folding his hands. "We've reviewed your resume, Ms. Morgan, but we also ran a background check." Her heart skipped but didn't stop. She nodded. "I expected that." The mood in the room shifted, a subtle chill creeping in. "It shows a conviction," the interviewer continued. "Financial fraud. You served 2 years. Could you explain?" Riley looked each of them in the eye, no bitterness, no excuses. Only the truth. "When I was 24, she began, voice steady, "I worked as a junior accountant at a startup. I trusted someone I shouldn't have, my boyfriend at the time. He used my credentials to authorize transfers. When everything fell apart, he vanished. I didn't have the money or evidence to fight it. I had signed documents I didn't fully understand." Silence followed, heavy and uncomfortable. She continued, a little quieter. "I went to prison for 2 years. My mother died while I was there. I missed her funeral. But I decided that wouldn't be the end of my story." One of the panelists cleared his throat, while another flipped through her resume again, his curiosity now tinged with caution. "I've worked part-time jobs since then," Riley added quickly, refusing to let her voice crack. "No one would take a risk on me. But I didn't give up. I got 3 new certifications, volunteered at a community center teaching kids how to code. I stayed clean. I put in the work." The silence returned, thicker now. Behind the tinted glass, Ethan Vale had listened to every word. Each line was a confession, raw and unvarnished, without a hint of self-pity. He saw no manipulation, no attempt to twist the story. Only honesty. Riley left the room 10 minutes later, her shoulders squared despite the polite "we'll be in touch" that meant nothing. Outside, she stood beneath the awning once more, rain dripping from the roof as the clouds began to break. She looked at the busy street, counting the coins in her pocket. 4 left, barely enough for a bus ride. Maybe she'd have to walk high above. Ethan stood behind the glass, arms crossed, watching her with a pensive look. "I've been the one lying on the ground. I know how it feels." Her words wouldn't leave his mind. She had walked away without asking for praise, without even expecting thanks. He pressed the intercom button near his office and spoke 2 quiet words. "Hold her file." Clean logic, efficient. Davis had praised Riley's coding samples, and she nodded, grateful for any encouragement. But the moment passed, and the atmosphere shifted, tightening like a rope around her chest. Barrett, the senior legal counsel, folded his hands atop the folder with her name on it. "Ms. Morgan," he began, his tone measured, "your skills are impressive. No question there. But there's another issue." Riley exhaled, bracing. She knew where this was going. Barrett tapped the file gently, as if it might burn him. "Your conviction." Silence. Riley inhaled, lifted her chin, and met his eyes head-on. "Yes," she said calmly. "I was convicted of financial fraud 3 years ago. I served 2 years." No one moved. Davis twirled a pen between his fingers, avoiding her gaze. Riley pushed forward. "I didn't do what I was accused of," she said, keeping her voice steady. "I was naive. I trusted the wrong person, my boyfriend at the time. He used my credentials to sign off on transfers, and when everything collapsed, he vanished. I stayed. I paid the price." Barrett leaned back in his chair, assessing her with a lawyer's cold detachment. "But you were released early, correct? Good behavior." "I was," Riley confirmed. "I spent every single day inside teaching, learning. I left with a coding certification and a job waiting tables. Since then, I've stayed clean. I've mentored kids. I've shown up for my work. I've shown up for myself." A hush settled over the table, so deep Riley could almost hear her own pulse. "I'm not trying to erase what happened," she added, voice softening but resolute. "I'm here to prove it didn't destroy me." Monica from HR lowered her gaze to the folder, fingers worrying its corner, while Davis looked unsure, glancing toward Barrett. Barrett steepled his hands. "This is a high-profile environment, Miss Morgan," he said. "Our clients trust us with sensitive data, huge investments. It's not only about what you've done, but how you are seen. How you are trusted." Riley nodded, acknowledging the truth. "I understand," she said. "I only ask you to judge me for what I've built since I fell. Not the moment I fell." The silence returned, heavier than before, stretching between them until Monica finally cleared her throat. "Thank you, Riley," she offered. "We appreciate your honesty and your time." It was the line, the polite dismissal. Riley's shoulders sank, just a fraction, as she stood and gathered her folder. "Will I hear from you?" she asked gently, trying to salvage some dignity. Barrett's reply was crisp. "We'll be in touch after we've reviewed all final candidates." Davis still couldn't meet her eyes. Monica managed a tight, professional smile. "Thank you again." Riley nodded, her posture proud even as her heart felt like a stone in her chest. She stepped out of the room, crossed the polished lobby, her reflection flashing in every pane of glass and chrome. Her stomach roared again, empty, but she ignored it. Outside, the drizzle had returned, fine and persistent, clinging to her face. She didn't bother with her umbrella. She let the cold droplets wash over her as she descended the building's steps, the city swallowing her once more. High above, on an executive floor, Ethan Vale had been watching through a pane of floor-to-ceiling glass. He hadn't moved the whole time. Now, he stood alone, jaw clenched, fists tight at his sides, a single thought replaying in his mind: I've been the one lying on the ground. He turned away, exhaled hard, and paced across his office, the skyline glittering behind him like distant stars. His eyes settled on the manila folder with Riley's name across the top, the photo clipped to its corner, showing a woman with a calm, steady smile that seemed at odds with everything written inside. Ethan took a breath and picked up the phone. "Legal," came the voice on the other end. "This is Ethan Vale," he said, voice steely. "I need a full background verification on Riley Morgan. Not just her conviction. I want the court transcripts, the public defender's notes, any civil suits, any follow-up. Everything." A pause. "Yes, sir. Right away." Ethan hung up and stared again at her photo, replaying every moment of that rain-soaked afternoon when she had handed him a sandwich without asking for a name or expecting a thank you. A few hours later, a thick file arrived. Ethan pored over each page. The details cut sharper than he expected. Sharamzi, the boyfriend, had been under investigation for 3 other financial frauds. Every case had been quietly dropped for lack of evidence. Riley's name, however, had been attached to all the signed authorizations. Her court-appointed lawyer barely fought for her. No follow-up after her release. No true attempt to prove her innocence. Ethan exhaled slowly, his frustration smoldering. He picked up his cell again, dialed. The voice that answered was older, warm. "Ethan, everything okay?" "Hey Dad," Ethan said, his voice softer than before. "Got a minute?" "For you always." Ethan hesitated, choosing his words. "You remember telling me business isn't just about profit. It's about the people you build it with." His father chuckled. "Sounds like me." "Why?" Ethan looked at Riley's photo one more time. "I think I met one of those people. In the rain. Holding a sandwich." Silence hummed across the line, followed by curiosity. "Tell me." Ethan did, summarizing enough for his father to understand. When he finished, his father was quiet, then said, "Sounds like it's time to decide what kind of leader you really want to be." Ethan nodded, a resolve settling over him like armor. "Yeah. I think it is." The next morning, he called a meeting of the hiring committee. Mandatory attendance. They filtered in slowly, a sense of tension thickening the air, whispering through the rows of chairs. Resumes lay stacked neatly on the conference table, but nothing felt neat anymore, not after Riley. Barrett cleared his throat, snapping Riley's file closed with finality. "Her answers were solid," he admitted, "but the conviction—" "We can't just overlook that," Davis interrupted, unease in his voice. Monica looked conflicted. "But she took ownership," she reminded them, "no deflecting, no excuses. That means something." Davis sighed. "Does it mean enough? This is Vale Corp. We can't put our name at risk just because someone has a tragic story." At that moment, the door opened, and the conversation froze. Ethan Vale stepped in, his presence calm but commanding. His sleeves were rolled, no jacket, just confidence. In his hand, He held something small and slightly crushed, its edges worn and still faintly damp. He walked to the center of the table and set it down, an empty wax paper sandwich wrapper, the deli label still barely legible. The committee stared, confused. Ethan looked up, his voice steady but carrying an undeniable authority. "Before you make any decisions," he began, "let me tell you who Riley Morgan really is." The room went still. 3 days ago, Ethan continued, I slipped and fell outside a deli. Hard. People passed me by, hundreds of them. No one even stopped. Except one person. She helped me stand. Didn't he ask my name, didn't he look for a reason? Saw I'd lost my lunch, so she walked back inside, spent the last money she had. Yes, I checked and came out with this. He tapped the sandwich wrapper. Monica's eyes widened. Barrett frowned. That was her. Ethan nodded. She didn't he recognize me? Didn't he know I was CEO of this company? She saw a stranger on the ground and acted. Davis leaned forward, brow furrowed. When I asked her why, Ethan continued, she said, I've been the one lying on the ground. I know how it feels. The room was silent, the echo of those words lingering like a ghost. She didn't sell me a sob story, Ethan pressed on. She didn't ask for a job, or a handout. She gave without expecting anything in return. And then, I watched her in that interview. She owned every bit of her past, even the part that would shame most people. She didn't flinch, even when you tried to break her with silence. Barrett exhaled, still skeptical. But Ethan, we have clients. Perception, Ethan cut in firmly, is something we build. If we're willing to create a precedent, then perception changes. We can be a company that punishes people forever, or we can be a company that believes courage deserves a second chance. He paused, letting the words land. As of today, he declared, I'm creating the Second Chance Initiative. We'll hire people not just by their past, but by the work they've done to rise beyond it. Monica drew a sharp breath. Riley Morgan will be the first, Ethan added, calm but iron strong. And she won't be the last. Davis rubbed a hand over his face. You're serious? Ethan cracked a faint, determined smile. If we can build satellites that map the stars, we can build a culture that knows how to forgive. He paused at the door, looked over the committee once more. She starts Monday, he finished. Make sure she has a desk. And a chance. He turned and left the room, leaving the empty sandwich wrapper behind. But for those still seated, it felt like he'd left something far heavier, a challenge, a mirror, a standard. Monday 8:30 a.m. Riley stood alone in the elevator, her new ID badge clipped to the collar of a thrift store blazer, a brand new spiral notebook hugged to her chest like a shield. The elevator hummed upward floor by floor, each ding making her heartbeat jump. When the door slid open, a handful of Vail Corp employees glanced her way. Some nodded politely. A few barely looked. Others whispered as she passed. She felt each of those stares like tiny cuts on her skin, but she held her head up, forcing herself to keep walking. By lunchtime, the tension was obvious. Conversations in the break room quieted as she walked in. A pair of co-workers avoided her eyes. Another group fell into a stiff silence, glancing at her then quickly away. At her assigned desk, a simple workstation with a fresh monitor, a chair adjusted to her height, she sat down, exhaled, and opened her notebook. She wrote 3 words at the top of a blank page, show them why. Then she started working. Throughout the afternoon, She caught snippets of doubt from people passing by, "That's her, right, the felon? Vale hired her, why? Guess they're giving criminals a shot now." Riley gritted her teeth but didn't react. She focused on the onboarding tasks, triple-checking every form, responding politely to her team lead, even offering to help test code for an upcoming product. A few co-workers softened by the end of the day. One even introduced himself, Caleb, from UX, and offered to walk her through the team's Slack channels. "Thanks," Riley told him, genuinely grateful. "Hey," Caleb said, shrugging, "everyone deserves a first day." That night, leaving the office, she felt lighter. Not healed, but lighter. In a top-floor conference room, Ethan watched her exit through the lobby. Pride and worry tangled in his gut, but something his father once told him echoed in his mind: some people shine brightest after they've been broken. He smiled faintly, then turned back to his work. Monday had been just the beginning. Riley was no longer just the new hire, she was the one with a story. The one with a past you couldn't ignore, no matter how polite you tried to be. Some colleagues watched her with cautious curiosity, some with a discomfort that tightened their voices when they greeted her. A few carried the subtle, pinched look of judgment. She did her best to meet all those stares with quiet grace. Head down, hands busy, she thanked people too often, laughed only when it felt safe, and tried never to take up more space than absolutely necessary. That afternoon, a small package landed on her desk. No sender. The wrapping was plain, but inside lay a leather-bound journal, its deep brown cover catching the light. Embossed on the front in silver, almost glowing, were the words, "From Fall to Flight." A slip of paper tucked between the first pages held a handwritten note: "Every comeback begins with one person who keeps walking. Welcome to your flight." No signature, but she didn't need one. Riley felt tears prick behind her eyes as she ran her fingers over the lettering, then opened to the first page, its emptiness waiting like fresh snow. An invitation to begin again. A few days later, she got an unexpected invitation through internal messaging: a quiet lunch hosted by the mentorship program. She almost closed the message out of fear, but something in her, the part that refused to keep her head down forever, urged her forward. The conference room that day was bright, not the sterile, sharp-cornered corporate space she'd imagined. The mentors were warm and casual, scattered around round tables with younger hires. And Ethan stood quietly at the back, not speaking, simply observing. A friendly older developer handed Riley a sandwich with a grin. "Don't worry, we have enough budget for seconds," he teased. By the end of that hour, she had collected 3 names she could email for support, 1 invitation for coffee, and a sticky note pressed discreetly into her palm that read, "Glad you're here." That night, she opened her new journal and wrote 3 shaky words across its first page: "Maybe I belong." A week later, an unexpected email arrived from Monica, the senior HR leader who had quietly become an ally. The subject line made Riley's heart stutter: "Internal culture session, we'd love you to speak." She blinked at the screen, reading the words again and again. A workshop about resilience and rebuilding company culture, and her name listed as keynote speaker. Her fingers hovered above the reply, already forming a polite decline. How could she stand in front of dozens, maybe hundreds, of people and talk about the worst years of her life? But before she could click send, Ethan appeared by her desk. "You're doing good work," he said simply, voice calm but encouraging. Then he handed her a folded page torn from the notebook he'd left for her months ago. Inside, in his unmistakable handwriting, were the words, "Your voice is already louder than your past. Use it." That night, Riley closed her eyes, breathed in courage, and typed one simple word: yes. The day of the event arrived. The conference room filled earlier than scheduled. Employees, some dressed in suits and others in weekend casual sweaters, lined the walls when the seats were gone. The chatter was low and expectant. No one had forced them to come. They came because they wanted to hear. Riley stood alone at the front, no podium to shield her, no polished presentation behind her. Just a blank white screen and her own hands, clasped tightly at her waist. When she spoke, her voice was a little shaky at first, but true. There was a time, she began, her gaze sweeping over the faces in front of her, not long ago, when the only label anyone saw on me was ex-convict. No one asked how, or why, or who I was before or after. The room stilled, the air dense with attention. I applied to dozens of jobs, she continued. Most ignored me. Some dismissed me without even reading past my name. And then, her eyes found Ethan, standing at the back again, arms folded, a quiet anchor in the sea of faces. Someone saw me, she said, her voice gaining strength. Not as a project. Not as a cautionary tale. But as a person. A hush fell over the crowd, so profound that she could hear the hum of the building's HVAC system. I'm not here, she continued, because someone saved me. I'm here because someone believed people can be more than the worst chapter of their story. Still no applause. Just listening, honest, silent, electric. This company gave me a chance, Riley finished, voice trembling only at the edges, but more importantly, it gave me a mirror. A mirror that didn't reflect failure, but flight. The first clap came from a young intern, a quick, sharp sound. Then more joined in. Soon, the entire room was applauding, not the polite corporate applause, but a rumble of recognition, the kind that said, "We hear you. We see you." Afterward, people lined up to talk to her. One woman, eyes glistening, said, "Thank you. I'm a survivor, too." A man shook her hand hard, voice low, "My brother was inside. You made me think about him differently." Others just nodded, as if to say I see you, without words. Through it all, Ethan stood at the back, never stepping forward, never taking credit. He knew the best thing he could do for Riley was simply hold the door open, then let her walk through it on her own. That evening, the office was nearly silent, the city outside growing sleepy, the Vale Corp glass facade catching the last traces of orange dusk. Only one light still burned, Riley's. She sat alone, papers spread like battle plans across her desk, graphs, code notes, bullet points, a half-rehearsed script. Tomorrow she would present a project proposal she'd helped design from scratch, her first real chance to show them she wasn't a mascot or a symbol but a strategist, capable and essential. Her eyes burned. She rubbed them, sighed, whispered to herself, 5 more minutes. Then her head slipped down onto folded arms, exhaustion claiming her without mercy. She never felt herself fall asleep. Ethan had returned late, a forgotten tablet drawing him back to the office after a long evening of investor calls. As he stepped onto the dim, quiet floor, he noticed the single pool of lamplight across the otherwise dark workspace. He walked toward it, curious, and stopped. There, curled slightly under the soft glow, was Riley, breathing slow, hair loose around her face, notes splayed out beneath her like armor she'd laid down. Even in sleep, a faint crease lingered in her brow, as if she was still fighting. He paused, then shrugged off his own coat and laid it gently across her shoulders. She stirred but did not wake. Ethan looked around, then stepped into the break room. A few minutes later, he came back with a steaming cup of chamomile tea, set it down next to her hand with quiet care, and settled in the chair across from her. For a moment, he simply watched. The hush, her breath, the fragile peace of her sleeping face. What he felt wasn't pity, or even admiration exactly, it was trust, a sense that this person was stronger than he'd ever been, and somehow that made him want to protect her from every unfair bruise the world might try to land. She shifted again, lashes fluttering, and slowly opened her eyes. Confusion came first, then awareness. She sat up quickly, eyes wide. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry, I didn't." He lifted a hand. "It's all right. You looked like you needed it." Her hand smoothed her hair, cheeks flushing. "I was just reviewing, for tomorrow." "You've earned a rest," he told her, his smile soft. "Come on. I'll drive you home." The car rolled through the quiet, lamplit streets. A low jazz tune hummed through the speakers, mingling with the faint cinnamon cedar of a car diffuser. Riley sat with her hands folded in her lap, still fighting off the remnants of adrenaline. "You can rest," Ethan told her, eyes on the road. "It's a long drive." "I'm fine," she replied, but 5 minutes later, her head dipped sideways against the headrest, sleep claiming her. He glanced over as they idled at a red light. Street lamps painted her profile in warm gold, a strand of hair across her cheek. Almost without thinking, his hand lifted, hovering, wanting to smooth it away, not to fix her, but because he had come to care in a way he didn't fully understand. Just before he touched her, her eyes opened. They froze. Riley sat up, cheeks pink, brushing at the stray hair herself. Ethan cleared his throat, eyes back on the windshield. "Sorry your hair was in your face." She looked out the window, flustered. "Oh. Right." Neither spoke again, but something had shifted in the air, unspoken but undeniable. When they reached her building, Ethan stepped out and opened her door. The night was cool, the street hushed. Riley hesitated on the curb. "Thank you," she said. "For tonight?" "For the coat." "For everything." He nodded. "You'd do the same." She smiled, a small, tired, genuine curve of the lips, then turned and went inside. Ethan stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, staring up at the glow of her window, and in the stillness of that night, neither of them really slept. 1 year later, Vale Corp was changed. The policy shifts had taken root, but the spirit had grown even stronger. Voices carried more freely down its halls. Teams collaborated with fewer hidden resentments, fewer walls. At the center of that cultural transformation was a single name, and a single woman who had once been written off by the world, Riley Morgan. Now she stood backstage, hands folded, heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. Before her, a massive ballroom buzzed with hundreds of leaders gathered for the National Workplace Conference. The banner above the stage read, "Faces of Cultural Transformation, Building Companies That Forgive and Flourish." Her face, smiling, determined, was printed on every program. Articles called her the symbol of second chances. But for Riley, it had never been about being a symbol, it was about being seen. The host stepped up to the microphone, voice bright and welcoming, and now, he announced, "Please help me welcome one of the bravest voices in our industry, Riley Morgan." A roar of applause rolled across the hall as Riley took a step forward. For a single, suspended moment, she closed her eyes, breathed deep, and felt the entire world steady around her. She was no one's cautionary tale. She was nobody's pity project. She was proof that even a broken wing could still fly higher, freer, truer. And as she stepped into the light, she knew it was only the beginning. The woman whose courage inspired one of the most progressive hiring movements in our industry, Riley Morgan. Applause thundered. Cameras flashed. Riley stepped onto the stage with quiet grace, her blonde hair catching the soft light like gold thread. She didn't read from a script, she never did. I used to think, she began, that redemption had to be earned through perfection. That you had to do something extraordinary to undo the worst chapter of your life. But I was wrong. She scanned the crowd. You don't need to be perfect, she said. You just need someone to believe the best parts of you still exist and are worth the risk. She paused, then smiled softly. For me, that someone wore a wrinkled shirt, held an empty lunchbox, and decided a stranger's kindness was more valuable than a clean record. A few people laughed gently, some wiped their eyes. I didn't have a polished resume or a polished past, she continued, but I had a heart that wanted to try again. That and a sandwich. She grinned, and the room broke into warm laughter and applause. Afterward, as the crowd slowly dispersed, Riley slipped outside through the side entrance of the auditorium. The sky had turned a soft peach, streaked with fading sunlight. Ethan was waiting under a tree. He had skipped the spotlight, as he always did, but he had been there all along, watching from the back row. He stepped forward, hands in his pockets, eyes searching hers. You were incredible, he said simply. Riley shrugged, half smiling. I just said what was true. They stood there a moment, the breeze brushing past them. Then Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper, familiar. Riley recognized it instantly. It was the note he'd left in the journal a year ago. Every comeback begins with one person who keeps walking. She touched it gently, moved. I've watched you, Ethan said, voice low, not just succeed, but lift others with you. Change lives, mine included. Riley blinked, caught off guard by the emotion in his voice. I never told you, Ethan continued, but before that day, I was close to walking away from all of it. From this job, this company. I'd lost faith in the people I was supposed to lead. He looked at her, eyes steady. And then you helped me when you didn't have to. She smiled through tears. I didn't have anything that day, she said quietly, just a sandwich. Ethan stepped closer. But I guess, she added with a laugh breaking through, it was enough. He smiled, then with no grand gesture, no dramatic pause, just a voice filled with certainty he said, I've waited to say this for a long time. Riley, I'm in love with you. Her breath caught, and for a moment all the noise, the doubts, the memories of prison bars and cold stares, faded. She nodded slowly, voice barely above a whisper. Me too. They stepped away from the building hand in hand, walking into the open air, no audience, no cameras, just two people finally aligned. As they reached the edge of the parking lot, Riley looked up. The last rays of sun filtered through her hair, catching gold at the edges, and beside her, Ethan smiled. Not because of the light but because he knew that woman had once given him lunch, and now she had given him a reason to believe again. If this story moved your heart, made you believe again in second chances, or simply reminded you that even a small act of kindness can change everything, then you are exactly where you need to be. At Soul Stirring Stories, we bring you real, raw, and beautifully imagined tales that speak to the strength of the human spirit, the power of compassion, and the quiet courage it takes to start over. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss a story that could change the way you see the world even just a little. Thank you for watching, and remember, sometimes, all it takes is a sandwich and someone who dares to see the good in you.